Welcome back to our growing experiment. We're here with Peggy and Eric from Three Forks Farms. Do you guys want to tell us a little bit about yourselves and your farm?
Yeah, so Peggy and I, um, where do we start? I feel like there's a long story
It is a
here.
long story.
So
You
when
tell
we,
your story
yeah,
and I'll
so
tell my story.
sure. So here at Three Forks Farms, we are a certified organic farm, and we do our main operation is vegetable crops, but we also do chicken for meat. We also grow out vegetables for seeds, and we also have laying hens that we have on the farm. So those are our four principal enterprises. And this is our seventh or eighth year. I think it's our seventh. I think this is our seventh season.
Yeah.
And both Peggy and I came to farming on slightly different trajectories. Uh, yeah, so for me, I sort of got into farming. I went to university. I have a degree in political science, and I worked in politics a little bit for a member of parliament and that kind of thing. And it's just not where I wanted to make a positive influence on the world, but it didn't feel like that work was working for me. So I thought I would do something different. And I've had a few careers, and I ended up starting working at a local food co-op, and because I wanted to get into farming and I didn't know where to begin. And then I met all these farmers there, and it was like making a living from agriculture, small scale agriculture is possible. And that's where for me that was like, okay, well, I can do this. And I sort of set my mind to it. And then from that moment, 5 years later, we had our own farm.
Mhm. Yeah. And for me, like at a very, very young age, like I grew up on a farm, but my parents split up and I didn't really like, they split up when I was like 6. So I didn't really have like the full farming experience. My dad was cash cropper, cattle farmer. And so I never really saw agriculture as kind of a career for myself. But in my 20s, I really started working a lot in kitchens in different places across Canada, and was really passionate about food from very early age. And I was gonna go do my red seal, like get my chef's papers. And I thought before I do that, I should understand where food comes from. And I did an internship on a farm in Southern Ontario, and it totally just blew my mind and changed the whole trajectory of what I was doing. So from there, I continued to work on farms, but continued to work in kitchens, and hoped that I could one day build like something that would blend the passion for those two things. And then, yeah, so I continued to work on other people's farms on rented land, and I managed a farm one season. And then I had a back injury actually, so I ended up having to stop farming. And that's what brought me to Sudbury to work at local Sudbury. And so because I continued to have a passion for local food and for making sure that people had access to good food. And that's where I met Eric. And then we hit it off and decided that we were going to share a passion and be crazy enough to start our own farm.
Yeah. And I worked on, once I decided I wanted to get into farming, I was like, well, I didn't know really much. Growing up, we had a big garden, but didn't know a lot about the processes. There's a bit of a difference between like farming and like having a nice sized garden. And so I was like, I need to see that better. So I volunteered every 1 day a week for an entire season at Feel Good Farms in Cache Bay. And that was a really good primer to learn sort of the pace of a season, and all sort of like there are like more and more like there are really clear phases in a season, and it was really helpful to see that. And then I started growing on somebody else's land as well, and getting as many workshops, going to as many farming workshops through the EFAO, the Ecological Farmers Association of Ontario, as possible, because there's definitely a learning curve.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that like when you were doing your first like renting land off other people, like you were doing markets and it was like maybe like a quarter acre that you were doing when you started.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, just to get your feet wet and learn all the processes in place and how to plan and all that.
Yeah, so yeah, I farmed for a couple of years as my own business and going to market. It was good to see what people wanted, and customers will be definitely quick to tell you what they don't want, which is really good to know, like and sort of see what is possible selling through farmers markets as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so one thing that you said that made me kind of think there was you mentioned there being, say, a difference between having like, say, your big garden and then say growing for a larger scale. So where do you start getting in on that? Like, what are the main differences in that, let's say?
I think like some of the differences are just certain efficiencies you just have to find with like how irrigation is maybe run, or just some of the management pieces. Like sometimes like picking insects off of things works on a certain scale, but when you have a lot, that might not be feasible anymore. So it's more like that kind of thing, where if it's more, I think more about the time that things take and just finding those real efficiencies in time, because yeah, time is not unlimited in a season, and there's only so many hours in a day. And
yeah, and I think like also for us, like we've always been like fairly like financially focused. Like we really wanted to be like able to both work off the farm. And so in order to be able to do that, we needed to find a way that we could be at the right size, that we could support ourselves and our farm, and have enough scale to be able to do that. And I think that piece is different for everyone, because everyone comes to farming from a different place and has different financial needs or what situation. And I think for us, like that scale piece is also, when we were started doing markets, it was about having a level of consistency, so that we could be consistently, customers could come to us and know that we would have product, and we'd have enough to sell throughout the market, which I think was also important. And in order to have that scale, like, or that volume of produce to be able to sell, we needed to like figure out what scale we needed to be at based on the number of customers we wanted to serve.
Is that something you guys were able to do right away? Just be full-time farmers, or did you have to kind of work a different job?
Yeah. Like our first year where we started Three Forks Farms, we were actually out before we were on Manitoulin, we were out in Warren. And that first year where we were growing as this new business, I was working 2 days a week at Feel Good Farms, and Peg was still working full time at the co-op.
Yeah. And I continued to work full time until spring of 2020, actually. So like for a number of years I continued to work full time. So it's only been in the last couple of years to kind of make it work.
We were really lucky that Peg's off-farm job, Peg was able to take a lot of time off in the summer. The work was more weighted in the winter, and I think you were able to work 2 days a week, like at your other job in the summer, and then focus the rest of the time on the farm. So we were basically working 2 full-time jobs.
Yeah, so it worked. I was really lucky. I was continuing to work within like local food system work after I left the co-op, but my bosses were really supportive of me being able to continue to farm, which is really convenient.
Yeah, well, you need sometimes a little bit of help to kind of get those things going, or you need to have the right situation at least lined up, right? Yeah, Yeah, so like what are some of the say practices that you guys use when it comes to your farming or your gardening? Like you'll hear a lot of people talk about like, permaculture, or they'll talk about regenerative agriculture, or they'll talk about more standard type farming. So what kind of practices do you guys use, and why do you use them? What's the strengths, pros, cons?
Yeah, for sure. I think what I would say is that we practice organic agriculture with a lot of regenerative principles on our farm. I don't know if you think that
Yeah.
is
totally.
accurate. We have I think the approach of using organics just always made a lot of sense to me right from the get-go. And the more that I know about farming, the more I believe in organic agriculture even more. And like really organic is at the very base is like fostering the biology in your natural environment to grow really nice crops. And at that very base of organic agriculture is soil, and soil is everything. Human civilization exists because of 6 inches of topsoil. And organic agriculture is about making sure that your soil, and soil is more than just dirt. Soil is like this living web, and you need to foster that natural environment to have all that life in your soil to grow really nice crops. And there's still all those, you still need to look at your nutrients like NPK. A lot of people say there's more to life than just nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and absolutely that is important. But then it's to also look beyond that and making sure that your soil is healthy.
Mhm.
And as an organic farmer, your job is to ensure that your soil is healthy, and then that the biology in there is as active as possible, and you try to really mitigate all the things like tillage that hurts your biology. Like, we're not a no-till farm, but I am very aware of the damage that tilling can do to your soil. So we really try to limit that kind of thing, because just to continue nurturing the soil. And I'm a big proponent of soil tests. We test a lot of our soil every year to know what direction our soil is heading in, and to make sure that I'm doing a good job, and I'm following a good path.
Mhm. I think the two other things I love about love about being an organic farm, like a certified organic farm, is the Canadian Organic Standard was created by people from all across the country, and it's a juried, like or not juried, but like the standards itself are vetted by a whole panel of experts in terms of what they feel is appropriate and what can be used in organic agriculture and what can't be. And it forces us to be held accountable to that, which is kind of cool. Like, we are audited every year by our organics inspector, and it really pushes, I think the being in that system pushes us to make sure that we're doing the right thing. And it's also clearly articulated. It's really, if you want a really exciting read, read the organic standard. But it's like, but I think just like having that level of accountability and also guidance, like there's definitely sometimes where it's like you don't know what to do, and you're like, okay, in this situation we can do this, and this will help us. And so that's been really good. And I think the other piece about being a certified organic farm that I also love is that because we are audited every year, we have to have really meticulous records of everything. So like when we get audited from seed to sale. So every piece of the process from when we buy a seed to when we sell a product gets audited. And so we have to be able to record and say like, okay, well, we, planted this many seeds, we transplanted it this time, we harvested this much of that crop, we sold it to these people, and we have to have those numbers. And as a result of having all of that data, we can also have really good information to do financial analysis. So it's like allowed us to be able to have records to be like, oh, we're, you know, not making as much money on this crop, but we're making better money on that crop. And so maybe we should try and focus on that crop rather than this crop, in order to be financially sustainable. Because like if we can't pay the bills, like we're not going to be here. So it's like it's really helpful to have that that data, I think, also.
So what are some of the ways that you would ensure that you maximize the biology in your soil? You already kind of mentioned that you sort of don't necessarily totally abstain from tilling, but you try to minimize it. So what else do you do to kind of put more biology back in?
Yeah, so bare soil is typically something that should be that I try to avoid, and sometimes I'm good at it and sometimes I'm not. But the goal is to, you know, whenever possible, put cover crops down to ensure, you know, it's really great for the soil. And often cover crops are also making other other nutrients and minerals and that kind of thing available to plants. And then they're also good at tackling other issues you might be having. Then there's also a lot of compost. We were really lucky that probably less than 20 kilometers from here, there's Meeker's Aquaculture, and they do rainbow trout, farmed rainbow trout, and a lot of the scrap from that industry is mixed with wood chips from Taylor Sawmill, which is 20 kilometers the other way. And then they compost that all together, and we have access to this really great compost called Meeker's Magic Mix. We use a lot of that. It's actually a really well finished product that I really like. So we add lots of that back into the rotation. And another thing that we do is we have laying hens in the meat birds, and we try to incorporate them often. Their job has been when we want to open up a new area to grow in, we'll send the meat birds in the year before. We'll put 1,000 meat birds over one of our gardens, which our gardens are like 100 by 122. We try to fit that many birds. It'll be a little bit more than that, and then so that's just so much manure, like chicken manure, on there. Another way, and we're trying to find more ways of incorporating animals, which is in part why we even got egg laying birds. It was more about how can we fit more animals in. We don't have a lot of experience with any ruminants, and chickens was just like this easy. The laying birds was like this easy win. Once we moved to Manitoulin, we started a farm gate stand, so we're like, eggs, everybody likes eggs, but for us, the profit is hardly in the eggs, is more in the compost that we get from the chickens. And we hope to incorporate more animals. One of our staff members, she runs sheep. She doesn't have any sheep this year, but in the future she had sheep last year, she's gonna have sheep next year. And we're trying to figure out ways how to incorporate the sheep as well into the system, just to get more animals on the land. And I think that's part of like a really healthy ecosystem for the farm, and would really foster really good soil biology.
And if I can just build on that, like the one of the benefits of running the animals, say like one season and then using that land the next season, is that one of the great benefits of putting manure on and over an extended period of time also allows for more active biology within the soil to start absorbing that and feeding on it. And so it just like when you can see a total noticeable difference in our areas where our chickens have passed through compared to any other place on the farm. Like the grasses and the pasture grasses that come up are just so lush and alive. And the soil itself is just like has a completely different texture because all of the microbiology has had time to be able to really do its work and to really get fed and start to replicate and do all of the magic that it does under the ground. So it's really cool to be able to see how incorporating meat birds into the land has really improved the fertility over time.
Is that a trend that you notice with other people that are also in the organic space as well? Or are you guys sort of doing something that's atypical?
No, I think we're connected. I think what we're doing is I didn't I did not invent any of these ideas. Definitely building on the knowledge of some of it is from mentors, and definitely our connection to the Ecological Farmers Association of Ontario, the EFAO. They they put on really great workshops and an annual conference that is of a really high quality. And going to this conference, we've been going for some every year since it started, and meeting other farmers and seeing other meeting other farmers, like even just during the breaks and chatting about what they do. And also the strength of the organization is also it's farmers teaching farmers. So it's the other members that are often putting on the work that are the speakers. And so you can really see a lot of examples. And I feel like we're all sort of building on each other. Like I definitely feel like through the EFAO, we're definitely part of a movement in Ontario. And some of this stuff has been learned through the farmer-led research project, where the EFAO will actually pay some farmers to do some experiments, and Sarah, who's in charge of that program, is a scientist, so she really sets it up to make sure the results are useful. So I feel like some of that knowledge and just really sharing with other farmers and learning from other farmers has been a huge benefit. And I definitely see a trend of more farms like ours getting animals on the land and getting them back in. Instead of being just a straight vegetable farm, they may be adding a little bit more animals into their process just to get that, I think for the benefit of the soil and the ecosystem. And for us, finding a lot of compost is like a lot of compost can be a bit challenging, although we do have access to meekers. I know other farms really do struggle to get enough compost affordably, and so sometimes having animals that you can then have butchered and you have another product that you can sell, and it improves the ecosystem and the soil biology is like win.
Well, and then you're also kind of maximizing land use at the same time, because you're expanding the feed that's available to your animals, which you're also then going to use to grow on. So it's not like you need to have your specific pen where you're going to have your animals, or your specific plains where you're going to take them into. You can kind of run them through the places where you're going to do your farming as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say, like, even on that note, like, I think since we moved to this farm, like, we have been able to cut back on our feed costs, but still grow our birds to the same weight by using the pasture properly, which is pretty incredible. So, like, that we grow them out for less time, and we don't have to feed them quite as much.
I think they're not necessarily that we're feeding not quite as much, but we have a better feed conversion ratio.
Right.
Like our chickens are just in better general health, and therefore the feed that we do give them turns more of that feed turns into meat instead of loss.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's really good to see that you guys are putting these sort of principles into practice, because a lot of what you're talking about, I've heard talked a lot about in permaculture and regenerative farming and these sort of spaces. And it's good to see that you're making it work, and it's good to see that there's all these positive benefits, right? And then, like you said too, if you're going to have a small business, you need to have access to these other potential incomes, right? So that's great. So what's really one of the biggest challenges for operating at your scale? Because to me, and maybe it's an idea that's not very good because I don't know enough about it, but to me, a lot of people doing something similar to what you're doing, to me, sounds a lot better than, like, say, one really big farm doing one thing, let's say. So what's the biggest challenge for doing something like that, and how do you make it sort of work, I guess?
That's a good question. I want somebody else to answer that and tell me. Uh, I don't like it's. I think the biggest like growing stuff is like one thing, and then there's like managing a production oriented business and making the sales to ensure like financial sustainability. It's always one like money feels like a dirty topic to a lot of farmers, but like realistically, if we don't make enough revenue, then we're not paying our staff, we're not paying our mortgage, so it's to be really focused on moving the product well. And then that's just what then there's that one side, and there's still growing the product that is nice. And I think it's a lot of planning that like there's a lot of planning that goes in, a lot of it goes out the door, and you're just going on the fly. But I think to start off, you need to have a vision of what your season is going to look like and what those financial goals are and how you're going to achieve those goals.
Mhm. Yeah, like I think like, well, two things come to my mind. One is that we're like I said, we're going into our seventh season, or we're in our seventh season, and we realized a couple years ago that like we just can't work like 15 hours a day all summer long. Like it's not possible, right? Like it's just not possible to work that much. It's not good for your body, it's not good for your mind, it's not good for your relationships, like. And so we've had to put like limits on how much we work. So we try to be reasonable. Like we still are working 10 to 11 hour days at this time of year, but we really try to keep it just to like the bare minimum. And sometimes that's a challenge, like it's hard when you are, the list of tasks to do on a farm is endless. There's so many things, and certain things get put by the wayside as a result. Like we may not have like the tidiest, prettiest farm ever. Our weed management can suck really bad sometimes, but we're producing food, right? And we're pumping it out, and we're making it happen, and we're employing people, and so that's good. But yeah, like it's time management, I think, is definitely a challenge, definitely. But
Yeah.
it feels good to be able to prioritize and make sure that we get the time that we need as humans to like not be farming every hour of every day.
Yeah, no, you definitely need to have that balance. That's another thing we'll hear lots too with the people that we've talked to, is that you're managing a very heavy workload, because in a lot of cases, like just like when you guys were starting out too, you're working a full-time job as well as working on the farm, starting on whatever production that you're doing, right? So I mean, yeah, it's that makes sense. You'd have to have that balance, because I mean, you're doing it for a better life, right? I assume, right? So I mean, if you're working yourself to death, do you have a better life?
Yeah, if you're, I want to do this for a long time, and I think being cognizant of also of the impact of, because a lot of the work that we do is quite physical, about, like very conscious about my knees and my hips. I sound like an old man, but I got to think about, I want to do this for another 30 years. I got to really take care of my body, and you got to take care of your mind as well. If you're so exhausted, and because you're working 16 hours every day, 7 days a week, which we did for some time, you start losing connection with your family. You're missing family weddings and that kind of stuff. And it's about finding some of that balance. And sometimes it's just like, yeah, there's always going to be work. And as we have more experience, we're like, yeah, it's fine. It's fine that there's still work, but it's 6 o'clock and I'm hot and I'm going to go swimming. Like,
Yeah.
still got to live, right?
And did you guys always have staff, or is that something more recently to try to help with that balance?
We've ever since we started the farm, we've always had a philosophy that we wanted to be able to have staff. And I think part of it may come from, like I had a back injury coming into this. And so just being realistic about not putting too much like 100% of the burden or 50% of the burden on each of us, but like also being better equipped to like manage the ebbs and flows of life, when it comes to health. But also I think philosophically, we feel that, our employment is like the people that we employ want to be farmers. And so part of it's almost like passing, doing for others as people did for us. Like we've been trained by lots of people, and lots of people put their faith in us as like either volunteers or staff in the past, and being able to share that knowledge, what knowledge that we do have with a future generation of farmers, I think is like a kind of like a duty, to really support agriculture moving forward. And yeah, we've been really fortunate to have some really great staff over the years.
And also, I would say at the scale that we're at, there's no way that just Peggy and I could. I don't think it's feasible. Like we've sort of been hovering at 4 or 5 acres of actual crops in the ground since the beginning, really. Maybe our first year was probably like 2 acres, then it went to 3, then 4. And we've been sort of sitting at 4 or 5 for the last 3, 4 years.
Yeah.
And we just always kind of needed that extra help. And also, like it's hard. No one runs at 100% all the time. So having a bit of a staff, means that if someone, is sore one day and is just not physically able to work super hard, or they're sick, the task, especially with a CSA program, like you got to keep going. So having staff also helps to relieve some pressure, but we definitely need them to run 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you told us a little bit about CSA. Can you explain what kind of CSA you guys do?
Yeah, so our CSA has been primarily a vegetable CSA.
Mm-hmm.
And we started off, I think in our second year with the CSA, we did, people who don't know what a CSA is, community supported agriculture, and it's a weekly vegetable box program. And our first year we did 20 shares, and I think we went up to 35, 60, and then we did 100. Then we didn't do CSAs for 2 years while we moved our farm from Warren to Manitoulin, just because that was going to be a big endeavor, which it was. And now this year we're back at doing a CSA program, and it's pretty exciting the way that we're working it this year. Our CSA has always been 15 weeks. And I find the 15 weeks we have traditionally chosen, or what I would say are 15 best weeks, where we have the most variety of product. Like we have a lot of product for a lot of the year, but sometimes it would become very repetitive. So we've sort of traditionally had stuck to just a simple 15-week CSA. But this year is super exciting because we have a customizable box program through a computer program called Farmigo.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to manage it. So customers are actually going to be able to, we're going to set them up with what they're supposed to have in a week. And if they want, they can log in and like pick, like, say they don't like kohlrabi, which to me is crazy. You should like kohlrabi. They sub out their kohlrabi, say for more lettuce or more cucumbers, or they could add extra. Say they're going to have family over, they could add extra items, and then say they're away for a week, they can say that they're going to be away, and they get to keep their credits, in which they can use at a later time within those 15 weeks. However, we are exploring more the idea of doing winter CSA and maybe a spring CSA. Now we have some greenhouses, and we're getting better at using them. So the fall would be an easy win, and maybe even a spring one.
And we have lots of root storage. And then we also, because we have the software, we decided to do 2 more other like optional CSAs. So they're the add-ons. So we do like egg CSA, so people can get like eggs every week, which is a very convenient way to distribute eggs. as you know how complicated it can be. And then we also partnered with one of our friends that run a mushroom farm here on the island. And so people can also buy a heartwood mushroom CSA too. So then they could get, so then they're all sold individually. So then, you know, people can get eggs and get mushrooms, they can get veggies. And I'm excited to see how this works. I'm also kind of terrified.
Yeah.
But we've also, just on a technical thing, like we have never packed boxes, and we hope to not have to do that anytime soon. We've always done our CSA's market style. So, you know, when people come to pick up, all the food is laid out and then they pack their box. And so we're going to continue to do that and see how that runs, so that when people come, you know, we pull out their order for the week and then we'll just pack it that way, because packing boxes is complicated and time consuming, and you need a lot of
mistakes.
Prone to mistakes. So it's a lot easier to make sure that you get everything right or close to right when you do it market style.
Yeah, well, that's almost like it's like you would have to do the same thing if you packed the box yourself. You would basically bring the box out, you'd open it up, you'd have your list and say, all right, do we have these things here? And the person say, oh yeah, we got everything. Then they take their box. If you do it your market style, you're like, oh, okay, what do you want? Put it all in the box. There you go. Like it's all done in one shot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you mentioned you got greenhouses too. So what does that add for you? What leverage is that for you with expanding your CSA?
Yeah, I think we have 7 unheated. We have 1 big high tunnel, and we have 6 smaller caterpillar tunnels. And what it's really, and we're still, like we've been using them for a while now, and we're still getting better at it. Like growing in a greenhouse and growing outdoors, or as you guys know, is a little bit different, and getting, especially in the shoulder season, getting the timing right, because there's just not the daylight hours available, and you can read about getting it right, and then you're there, and then the time is different, like maybe the book was written, I think Elliot Coleman, he's down in Vermont, a bit different than here. So getting it right has been, a fun project, and we're still working on it, but having greenhouses has really improved our hot crops, our vining fruit crops. We don't grow tomatoes in the field anymore. It's just so unpredictable. And we do a lot of cherry tomatoes and beefsteaks, and in the tunnels has just really increased its reliability overall. And then, finally we're doing peppers a little bit better. I'm far from being an expert on peppers, but putting them in a greenhouse in an unheated tunnel makes a huge difference, like compared to growing them straight in the field. And then the early season is also become really interesting, how early we can start planting, and we're exploring overwintering crops, which is tricky. It's another issue of timing, getting the timing right, because I have, we planted in the fall, and every bed in our tunnels, basically I want 3 to 4 crop turns in each bed per year. Some things, it doesn't allow for that, but I have a schedule for 3 points in the year. And the hard part has been overwintering things, not knowing how quickly they're going to wake up again, and how quickly they're going to come to size, or how quickly are they really going to go to seed, because they're biannuals. Like overwintering kale is cool, but then their instinct is to go to seed in the spring. So how long, if I overwinter a little bit of it before my spring kale would be ready, what does that window look like? And that's been a bit of a learning curve for us, and it's been sort of an interesting project.
Thankfully, we're also a seed farm, so that helps.
Yeah, well, that helps. Like that's one thing I found with ours too, is because like we just got our greenhouse really last year, so we haven't had to have too much experience with it yet. But we tried starting stuff really early. We started in like mid-March. I think we started planting stuff. And then things were growing pretty good, but we had to put a bunch of heat in there. Like it just wouldn't retain enough heat overnight when it would get cold. And so that's like kind of like you said, learning that timing bit. And then once we got sort of out of the cold shock part and stopped worrying about that, I just started fighting with these bugs. I got these little red, I'm not even sure what they are. They're these little red bugs. They're all over the tomato plants there. And I'm constantly fighting them. I'm spraying them with neem oil and like kind of a bit of soap. And that seems to help cut it down, but I haven't been able to get totally rid of them. And I've noticed that they're like, they'll stop the fruiting of the flower there, like they'll stop it from converting.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. And so I've been fighting with them like crazy. I'm trying to pick them off. And earlier on, you mentioned like, you know, when you get into scale, that's one of those big things. And I'm out there still trying to pick these guys off of a few plants, and that's a pain in the butt.
We still pick bugs, but we like, it can't be our strategy. Like we've had cucumber beetles and like walked rows and rows and trying to just get a little bit ahead of the cucumber beetle to not kill our squash plants, just let them get to a certain size, and then it doesn't really matter as much. But we do squish bugs.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So in the greenhouse, do you find that you fight with the pests more in the greenhouse, or you fight more with them out in the field?
I find that it has been more in the field. I'm just gonna like knock on some wood. I try really hard to break pest cycles, and so far with rotation, but you know, right now we do have a little bit of aphids in one of our greenhouses. Luckily, we ripped out all the plants that it wanted to eat. It was kind of done. We've got to make way for more, but luckily we haven't had a huge problem. We do, when we have cucumbers, we actually will use insect netting, and we'll insect net the whole, like the roll up sides and the doors to keep the cucumber beetle out. The pressure of cucumber beetles is quite high where we are, and every year, and it's what we just have to do to get our cucumbers.
Yeah, we use a lot of insect netting and remay for protection against bugs. That's kind of our primary strategy. So certain things like sweet midge, so any of the brassica crops, anything that's a brassica, we all gets covered with either insect netting or remay. And particularly stuff that's in the ground for an extended period of time, like cabbage, we'll fully bury in all the edges so that the bugs can't get in. And like for the most part that works. Sometimes it doesn't work, like when you have grasshoppers that hatch inside your remay and then eat everything and just try to get out. So but maybe it's a bit of balance, you know, like I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So
I guess inside the greenhouse, we have a little bit more control of the plant species that are around. You know, outside in nature, there can be, you know, in the field, like there can be all sorts of plants that can sustain those insects. Whereas in the greenhouse, I really try to make sure to break certain cycles, especially with like brassicas. I really try to make sure that each tunnel at some point in the year has none in there. Like we grow a lot of stuff in that plant family, but I really try to make a point of trying to break that cycle and try to make sure that, you know, there are certain insects that are specialists that will really only eat one type of thing. The harder ones are really those generalists that will eat just about anything.
like aphids.
Yeah, they can do that. And
I think the other thing that I think the other strategy that we employ that I think is important to note is like our crop rotation. And so, you know, we even in our tunnels, Eric does all the management of the tunnels and the greenhouse, but like you always make sure that, you know, the same family of plants is not going to go in that tunnel the succeeding year. So like cucumbers get changed, and then we'll followed by like tomatoes, and then like the brassicas. And so we're really trying to be careful about on the farm not growing the same crop in the same place 2 years in a row.
I'll say the tunnels are more challenging than in the field. Like the field, there's a lot more options, whereas the tunnels, there's only so many plant families you typically grow in covered culture. But especially like the disease prone crops, I really like. I find brassica diseases, like we haven't had much of a hard time with it so far. Whereas like, like tomatoes and and cucurbits or like cucumbers, like they're just like much more prone to disease.
Yeah.
And so I really make sure it's not a long cycle, it's 1 year. The cucumbers are out in the cat tunnels, and then the tomatoes are in the high tunnel, and then I flip them. The next year the cucumbers go in, or like they go into the high tunnel, and tomatoes out in the cat tunnel. So it's only a 1 year on, 1 year off, but I hope to at least, it's the tool that I have to break those pest cycles, is to try to not grow the same thing and have those moments of like nothing in the tunnel as well. Like that's tricky with overwintering. Ideally, you have your greenhouse. For me, is a strategy that I've learned was have nothing in your greenhouse for a month or two, like absolutely nothing, and you're starving your pest out. But then there's such a temptation to have things overwintered, and that's where it's like trying to, at least if we're going to do that, keep those crop families, try to break those cycles with crop families.
Yeah, I do think that like, yeah, while there is like something to be said about like overwintering crops and having stuff going all year, I think that there is something to be said about when you can freeze out your tunnels, like in terms of, letting everything die and letting it get cold and frozen and kill any of those pests. I think there's something to be said about that, but whether you can do it or not, I guess we pick our battles, like
Yeah.
Yeah, because our goal was always to try to figure out how to grow over the winter because we want to extend our growing season.
Sure.
But then we also thought of that as well, where we had, I don't know where we had seen it, but somebody had suggested that. And we're like, that kind of makes sense, let it just kind of all die off.
Yeah.
And then start fresh. But it's, you kind of want to use it all year round.
Well, and then that makes me think when you guys were saying that too, that you'll put different crops in, because now I'm thinking about in there, those bugs, they love those tomatoes and they would really go after our peppers, but they're not too fussy on the Swiss chard. They were on it for a while, but they seem like they've left the Swiss chard alone by and large, and they're sticking mostly to the tomatoes. And I had a couple of other plants in there and they weren't on those. So they might be something that likes tomatoes especially. And like you're saying, if we wanted to break that cycle, unfortunately, we just put a bunch more tomatoes in there, of course. That's exactly what you do, right? Well, we didn't know any better.
Well, that's kind of what we thought, is that the dome would do really well with, like you said, the tomatoes and the peppers. So that's mostly what we have in there, because we think it makes most sense. We have everything else kind of outside.
Yeah, and other than that, the plants are growing great. Like that's the thing, though. I'm just fighting with these bugs. So I'll have to try that kind of idea of breaking up the cycle, or we'll figure out. We'll have to add the dome into our rotation with the rest of our beds and stuff. Because that's the other thing we've been trying to learn too, is rotating your beds and not putting stuff in the same place twice and all that kind of thing. So yeah, it's like it's a lot of management.
It's tricky. It's like a whole puzzle. It's like a constantly evolving puzzle of where things go. And
Yeah.
You're like, I want it there, but then nature is like, no,
Yeah.
that's not gonna work.
yeah, totally.
In the winter, I spent a lot of time with spreadsheets, and sometimes I just sit there and I stare at them for a while and just trying to figure out like what is the best, because I want this to overwinter. Like some of the problems I ran into this year is that I planted onions where I want tomatoes, but the onions weren't quite to size. But that real estate is way too valuable. Like onions, you gotta go. Tomatoes have to come in because tomatoes are super important. So, and I wish I had caught that. So like this winter, I spent a lot of time just staring at these spreadsheets, just trying to, and then I'll make small changes and I think about that for a while. And it takes me a little while, and I'll realize things sometimes when I'm doing something completely different, like doing dishes, and I'll like, oh, next time I go back to that spreadsheet, I'll have to change that. And then I get there and I'm like, what did I want to change again? I have to stare at it some more.
Yeah, and like that kind of management, that planning makes me think. Sophia was showing me a video from someone we follow on Instagram. They're a Superior Gardener, and she was talking about laying out her garden in like a grid pattern. She would do like these 1 foot by 1 foot sort of grids, and she knew she could plant like a certain amount per square, basically. And that was kind of cool because I could see you like basically taking some grid paper and like literally drawing it out, and you could have exactly where everything is going to go. So when you guys plant, I mean, are you guys doing sort of like rows, and you kind of know like, okay, this patch over here is this time, and then you're kind of rotating like that kind of way? Or do you have any sort of intercropping or?
We don't do a lot of intercropping. I find in the seed garden there's a little bit more, it's broken up a lot more. In the market garden area, it's in the field, everything is typically 1, 2, or 3 rows, and that's just for cultivation. It just makes the management, if if you know what one row is going to be, and then you can set all your all the, like Peggy does actually all the cultivation. She can drive a tractor straight. Like put the knives, and you always know like, oh, this bed is 2 rows, so I can have the knives in this pattern, and it's going to work well. And it was just try to standardize some of the pieces. Then a lot of the equipment can be used from one area to the other. Like, and most of our gardens are broken up into family type. Like all the lettuce is grown in one garden for this year, and then the brassicas are all together, and then the potatoes are in one area. So we try to like break them up by family. And typically I do, if I'm going to do something, I want to be worth the time to set up the job and do the job. So usually at minimum, I'll do at least 1 full bed of something. I don't very often do 3/4 of a bed or anything like that. If I can't really sell a whole bed of something, then is it really worth it? Was it worth like organizing myself, my brain, getting the staff set up? Like, it has to be just kind of worth it.
Yeah. So every bed in the field's 200 feet, and
That means, theoretically my row cover should all be 200 feet. So if you need to rip out with some row cover, you don't have to, is this one long enough? Is this one long enough? We have basically just a couple sizes of row cover. We have some for the tunnels, and then some that are for the field. And then for some reason, there's still some that are a weird size, like 175 feet. And I'm like, why is this 175 feet? Yeah, so we try to standardize a lot of those things to just find efficiency when it comes to planning, and then efficiency with the tools that we have, so everything can kind of be very modular.
Yeah, it makes sense that you'd have to be able to do that, because you also mentioned too that in some cases you're trying to use that same plot, like you said, I think 3 times you said in the season.
Yeah, for in our tunnels, like most beds, some like the kale will stay for maybe all 3 blocks, but every bed is planned. There's 3 blocks per season in every bed in our tunnels, blocks of time. Yeah.
Okay, right.
So you mentioned the seed garden. Can you tell us a little bit about your seeds?
Yeah, that's all you, Pegs.
yeah. Well, I've been saving seed like for a long time. A friend of mine taught me how to save tomato seeds, and I've always been really passionate about it because seed is the fundamental part of food security. And if we don't have seed, then we don't have food. I'm really passionate about it. And a couple years ago, I had the opportunity to take a course, like a certificate in organic seed production, which I never really felt like I had the confidence to be able to take seed production to the next level. I still don't know if I have the confidence, but I'm still doing it. But anyways, yeah, we do. I've trialed with lots of different things over the past couple of years. We're really trying to focus on the crops that grow well in this area, and really trying to build regionally adapted varieties. So stuff that will actually really grow in Northern Ontario. And that's kind of been our primary focus, is, making sure that we have varieties that people can confidently grow in Northern Ontario. And it's been a real learning experience as we've scaled up. Because, the thing about seed production that's so different than vegetable production is that, in vegetable production, you have to produce like a really great vegetable, right? But in seed production, you have to create a really great vegetable, but then you have to keep it alive and thriving for like double the amount of time, which is a real challenge. And then there's also specific climatic conditions that are really different for seed production than for vegetable production. One of the reasons why moving to the Manitoulin Island was really appealing to us is because of the climate here. We can grow a number of seed crops here that we wouldn't have been able to grow in Warren, which is really great because the season's just a little bit longer. The fall, like the late summer, is a bit drier, so we can do some more dry seeded crops, which is really great. Yeah, and overall, I think it's been a really great addition to the farm. It also is a nice balance, workload balance, because while like growing seed does take time in the summer, it doesn't take the same level of energy and focus, you know, in like harvesting things and for markets and all that stuff. And when you're harvesting for seed, you're harvesting the bulk of it, most of it at once. Sometimes some crops you have to harvest multiple times, but and so a lot of the work, I would say, in seed production is actually in the fall and the winter. So it's been a really great balance to have one, additional income coming in the winter, but also having like this work that we can do in the fall and winter that's adding to the value of the farm that we have, and also like contributing to seeds, like food security in our region. And
We're reaching new customers because
Mhm.
because seed packets are mailed out. You know, they don't, like, we primarily sell Sudbury and Manitoulin, but now with the seeds, we can mail them out to anybody, anywhere. Like most of
Mhm.
our customers for seeds are in Northern Ontario,
yeah,
but they're, you know, all over the north.
yeah, we have a lot and now we're getting customers from all over Ontario, and so it's you know, it's a slow but lovely growing part of our farm. And you know, we have done some contract production for other seed companies, and we may explore doing that as well in the future, as we get more confident with the growing season on this land in Manitoulin, and just get more systems in place for growing and harvesting seed. It is also a scale game when you come to doing wholesale seed production. So gotta tread lightly on that one, but it is really fun, and we're really proud to be able to sell seed or produce seed and sell it from our farm.
Yeah, because I imagine if you're going to be selling seeds, you probably have to produce like a ton of seeds, right? And then you gotta, like, I mean, I guess you'd have to know roughly how many seeds you're going to get per, say, fruit. Like, let's say if you're getting them from cucumbers, right? You got to know, well, how many seeds am I going to get per cucumber? How many cucumbers per plant? And you got, I guess you'd have to plan that all beforehand to know how many seeds you're going to get in the end, right?
Yeah, and the thing is that with seed production, there's so many variables that will contribute to like those end results, like in terms of, you know, how much volume you will get on any given like plant, you know. So in the example of cucumbers, it's like in a lot of what a lot of people don't realize is that in a lot of crops, like every seed that is inside of that fruit, for example, is actually result of pollen directly being pollinated. So if you don't have enough pollinators or enough cross pollination happening between male and female flowers, then your seed production, like the seed volume inside your fruit, is actually going to be lower. And so like having enough pollinators is really critical, but also having enough fertility is also really critical. So, you know, you have to have really healthy plants in order to have a lot of seed. And then I think the other thing is that, you know, that data piece of like production planning and like crop planning is still something that we're trying to figure out. Like there, you know, there's all these great authors, like northern authors that have done all this stuff about crop planning or growing market gardens and stuff. But when it comes to seed production, there's not a lot of data out there. Like there's not a lot, you can't be, okay, like how much seed am I going to get off 10 cucumber plants? Like that's not something you can just look up. So thankfully we have a good network of people that we work with, like other seed growers, and we've learned from them. And there's a real push these days to have more seed production happening in Canada. And so there's a concerted effort to collectively start putting together like these kind of thresholds of, how much seed you will get in this region for these crops. Because like how much we can produce on like say a wet seed crop here versus like in British Columbia is going to be totally different. So there is a big effort to start figuring out like some more standardizing or like some data on what volumes can be produced, which is really exciting because we definitely need more seed producers in Canada, because we just aren't growing nearly enough seed.
Yeah, well, that makes me think. I remember hearing somewhere that most of the world's seeds, I can't remember the percentage. I want to say it was 80 or 85%, but most of the world's seeds were either grown in South America, and I want to say over in Asia or something like that. That's where most of the world's seeds come from. And so like that's like if you're talking about food security, that's obviously a big problem, right? Because if you don't have seeds here in say Canada, well then you can't grow stuff. And especially if say you have a lot of seeds that are like GMO, what I understand is there's basically patents on the information that makes up those seeds. And basically people own that, right? And so I imagine you have to pay those people to use those seeds. And if you don't have any money, well, then you don't have any food. But that's kind of going into a different direction. One thing that made me think of too, when you were talking about for getting more seeds and say your cucumbers, you need to increase pollination. Do you guys also have something on your farm that say encourages pollination? Like, do you say have like lots of flowers planted, or is it just like enough because you're growing all different kinds of natural flowering varieties that'll bring in say those pollinating bugs? Or
I would say one of the lovely parts about our farm is that we have a lot of unkept areas. Like, so we have, stone rock walls. We have a bunch of areas that are in between our gardens that are not mowed, that are filled with butterfly milkweed and all sorts of flowering plants like clovers and wildflowers. There's tons of daisies everywhere right now. So I would say that we have a lot of natural pollinator attracting habitats all over the farm. We also have a pond, which is really critical for pollination because the pollinators need to access water if they can't get it from the ground or from the plants. So I think that we really try to foster the right habitat here on the farm as well.
And we hope in the future to have someone else hives here. One of our good friends is a luthier, like a guitar builder, and uses lots of, he wants beeswax for, I don't know how to build guitars. For some reason he wants beeswax. And so he wants to put some hives here so that he can extract the beeswax. I think that's great because more bees are really great. More bees is a good thing.
yeah, well, yeah, that's another crucial sort of part of the whole farming experience, right? You need to have these pollinators there. And like that's another thing that I've heard before, like there's a concern with a lot of our pollinators dying off, bees specifically, right? And that may be because of certain less organic farming practices, let's say, or at least there's some indications that might be what the case is.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Well, so I think we've talked about all the stuff we could talk about right now. That's a weird way to end it, eh?
Yeah,
That's perfect.
Sorry. I don't know, that's what came to my head to say that. Now I'm making it worse. Oh
We've
my-
done it. It's been done.
All right, yeah. Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for talking to us. That's what I meant to say. That's what a normal person would say at the end of an interview. Anyways,
That's okay.
thanks
Normal's
for-
not fun.
Oh, great. I'm glad you guys had fun. Thanks for talking to us. Where could people get a hold of you guys, get a hold of your product, or find a way to support your business?
We are all over the internet. So we're on Instagram, social media, Facebook. So Three Forks Farms Manitoulin. We also have our website, threeforksfarms.com. If you're in the Sudbury Manitoulin area, we're at lots of the markets. So you can find us there. And you can also sometimes find our stuff in some grocery stores if you're lucky.
And then we're open on farm
Oh yeah.
on Friday from 10 to 4, and Saturday 10 to 2. And during the month of July and August, we will be doing farm tours at 11 o'clock on Saturday, and people can register for that. And we also do the Thursday market in Sudbury every Thursday. We're there, and then in the winter we do the Saturday market until we run out of produce, which is usually February, March.
Okay,
Okay.
perfect. Well, thanks so much.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks
Thanks for
so
having
much.
us.